The coffee was still warm on the table when Leslie Arden vanished from the small town of Conway, New Hampshire, population 9,112. Thanksgiving night, 2002 arrived with a heavy snowstorm that blanketed the entire White Mountains range. At 9:52 p.m., Leslie's neighbor, Ruth Callahan, looked out her kitchen window and saw the 29-year-old yoga instructor walk to her car, carrying her familiar brown leather purse. Leslie said she was just stepping out to meet a friend and would be back soon. Callahan watched her figure disappear into the wind, the navy blue wool coat the last splash of color against the white snow. What happened in the next 48 hours would haunt Conway for the next 16 years. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. Winter 2002, the state of New Hampshire lay quiet under the characteristic cold of the northeastern United States. Snow had begun to cover the mountains around Conway, a small town nestled among pine forests and lakes, where residents were still used to leaving doors unlocked and trusting one another like family. Crime was almost negligible. Serious cases were spoken of as rare events that happened elsewhere, never here. In that slow-paced atmosphere, 29-year-old Leslie Arden was a familiar face at the community center. She taught yoga to middle-aged women, helping them stay in shape and find balance through the cold season, and sometimes gave free art classes to elementary school kids. Leslie lived alone in a small, tidy apartment near Main Street, keeping meticulous notes of every class and schedule. She rarely went out at night, except for holidays or to meet close friends. On the evening of November 27, 2002, the day before Thanksgiving, she left home around 8, telling her close friend Nina she was heading to the Timberline Bar in downtown Conway to meet an old acquaintance who had just gotten back in touch after many years. According to bar staff, Leslie arrived alone, ordered a light beer, chatted briefly with a few regulars, and left around 10 o'clock. No one saw her leave with anyone. They only remembered her gray knit beanie, dark green parka, and the same calm expression she always wore. The next morning, her yoga class never opened. Both her home phone and cell phone went unanswered. By afternoon, Nina drove to her friend's apartment, door locked from the inside, lights off, everything neat and in place. Only the silver Honda Civic, usually parked out front, was missing. A growing sense of unease spread as she called everywhere from the local hospital to shared teaching friends, but no one knew where Leslie was. As night fell over the town and snow began to fall heavily, Nina contacted Leslie's family in Vermont. After many unanswered calls, the family decided to report a missing woman to the Carroll County Sheriff's Office. The report was entered into the system at 9:47 p.m., marking the start of a disappearance that no one in this small town could have imagined would drag on for more than a decade. That same night, an internal bulletin reached the Carroll County Sheriff's Office in Ossipee. The night shift logged missing adult female, possible exposure, and escalated the file to state level for classification. Lieutenant Michael Easton, an investigator with the New Hampshire State Police, experienced in missing persons cases under harsh weather conditions, was assigned the case. He arrived in Conway at dawn the next day, with snow still thick on the roads and the temperature down to -7 degrees. Easton began with standard procedures, checking nearby hospitals, emergency rooms, and highway patrol posts along Route 16. No records matched Leslie Arden's description. At the community center where she worked, colleagues confirmed she had not called in sick, had no plans to leave town, and her classes were still scheduled normally through the end of the week. Her cell phone had been off since the night of the 27th. There were no bank transactions or credit card uses, no signs of voluntary departure. Easton's preliminary conclusion: high probability of foul play. The weather continued to worsen. Heavy snow closed many forest roads. Normally, protocol required a 48-hour wait before launching an official search for an adult, but Easton waived the rule. He believed that in such extreme conditions, if Leslie had met with trouble that night, any delay could render rescue efforts meaningless. That same morning, he requested emergency mobilization. local police, volunteer rescue teams, and Forest Service units equipped for snow travel and outdoor operations. A temporary command post was set up in the Conway High School parking lot with ample space and reliable power. Topographic maps were spread out on tables. The search area was divided into three main sectors: Route 16, the Western Pine Forest, and the shores of Lake Ossipee. Teams carried short-range radios, high-powered flashlights, and handheld GPS units. Easton checked traffic camera systems and confirmed no footage showed Leslie's Honda Civic leaving town. He ordered state patrol posts to monitor abandoned parking areas and remote mountain roads. By mid-afternoon, more than 30 people had gathered at the staging point. Before heading out, Easton wrote in the command log, "Situation: dangerous weather, possible victim accident, or forced removal. Objective: locate vehicle and last known position." It was the first step of the official search around Conway, and the moment everyone on the team still believed they had a chance to bring Leslie Arden home safely. On the afternoon of November 29th, the official search operation began. Snow was nearly half a meter deep, and wind blowing down from the White Mountains carried bone-chilling cold, reducing visibility to a few dozen meters. Under Lieutenant Michael Easton's coordination, 3 teams fanned out along the pre-mapped routes, one south along Route 16, one along the Western Pine Forest, and one sweeping the shores of Lake Ossipee, where many stretches of road had no lighting. Teams carried all-terrain vehicles, handheld radios, high-powered floodlights, and FLIR thermal scanners provided by the rescue service. At 13:20, the forest team reported an unusual tire track cutting across a snow-covered trail. The ruts were deeper than normal, suggesting a medium-sized truck had passed before the heavy snowfall. Easton ordered the coordinates marked and photographed, then compared them to Leslie's usual routes. The trail did not match any path she normally took. Meanwhile, the Lake Ossipee team found a gray-silver plastic fragment about the size of a palm buried under fresh snow, its edge cracked and broken. The piece was collected, sealed, and temporarily labeled Fragment A01. There were no signs of people or other vehicles within a 3-mile radius. The few remaining traces were quickly covered by the thickening new snow. By 16 o'clock, the wind shifted. The blizzard moved south from the north, dropping visibility below 10 meters and making outdoor activity dangerous. Easton ordered all teams to stand down and regroup at the command post to preserve manpower. He wrote in his operational log, "No vehicle located, no heat signatures, no further travel traces, must wait for weather improvement to expand radius." The team members returned to the command center in silence, coats caked with ice and boots heavy with slush. At 17:45, the entire team was temporarily released, leaving only 2 patrol units to monitor Route 16 overnight. Inside the temporary headquarters, Easton reviewed the map, connecting the day's marked points: one small plastic fragment, a few faint tire tracks, a blank expanse between forest and lake, all disjointed and not yet enough to form a theory. The blizzard continued to smother Conway, temperatures plunged, and every search effort had to be postponed until the weather allowed. In the heavy atmosphere of that winter night, he knew that every passing hour made the line between life and death for the missing woman thinner than ever. The next morning, once the blizzard eased and main roads were cleared, Lieutenant Michael Easton shifted focus to canvassing witnesses to reconstruct Leslie Arden's final movements. He and 2 officers went to the Timberline Bar, recorded as the last place she was seen on the evening of November 27th. Both the owner and bartenders clearly remembered Leslie because she was a regular, usually coming with friends on weekends, but that night she was alone. The bartender confirmed she arrived around 20 o'clock, sat at a table near the window, ordered a light beer, and briefly spoke with a few familiar faces. One customer, Alan Burke, said he talked to Leslie for about 10 minutes and described her as cheerful, showing no signs of stress or worry. Around 22 o'clock, he saw her leave, wearing her gray knit beanie and dark green parka, heading toward the rear parking lot. No one saw anyone with her or noticed when her car left. Easton requested all security camera footage in the area, but most systems at the time were internal only and did not retain long-term data. The only usable recording came from a local bank ATM across from the timberline. It was blurry from snow on the lens, but showed at 22:12 a small red pickup truck stopping for a few seconds at the curb, headlights on, then turning south. The plate was illegible, but the body shape and height matched older Ford pickups common in rural areas. Easton had the frame enlarged, saved a digital copy, and sent it to the Concord lab for enhancement. At the same time, he cross-checked statements from residents along Route 16. One milk truck driver reported seeing headlight reflections in the snow near the Pine Ridge intersection that night, but couldn't make out the vehicle because of the bad weather. All leads pointed in one direction, the stretch of road from the Timberline Bar along Route 16 to the northern edge of Lake Ossipee. Easton marked the area in red on the map and labeled it last confirmed route, the final road Leslie was likely on before she vanished. He updated the internal system and issued a statewide alert for a red pickup truck of unknown plate, possibly connected to the disappearance. That same afternoon, Easton held a short briefing at the temporary command post to align the investigation. Focus on vehicle canvassing, check registration records within a 20-mile radius of Conway, and reopen the search along Route 16, now confirmed as the victim's last known location. Outside, snow began falling again, covering whatever traces remained from that late November night, the night Leslie Arden walked out of the Timberline Bar and was never seen again. On the morning of December 1st, as the search along Route 16 expanded southward, Patrol Team 3, led by Officer Daniel Moore, spotted an unusual object beside a side road leading to Lake Ossipee, about 8 miles from downtown Conway. Thick snow limited visibility, but as they approached, they recognized the rear end of a car buried deep in the white drift. Part of the license plate was visible enough to identify. It was Leslie Arden's silver Honda Civic. The car sat slightly tilted into a drainage ditch, the right rear wheel nearly submerged in ice. Doors were closed, windows intact, no signs of forced entry. More than 10 centimeters of snow covered the roof, indicating the car had been there at least 2 full days. Moore brushed snow from the door handle with a gloved hand and tried it, locked tight. He checked around the vehicle, no fresh footprints, only faint marks almost completely erased by wind and snow. Too old to date accurately. He radioed the command post, possible match with missing subject vehicle, request immediate confirmation. 10 minutes later, Lieutenant Easton arrived on scene. He carefully noted the car's position, no evidence of a high-impact crash, the front bumper only lightly scraped against a dirt mound, chassis undamaged, suggesting the car may have been parked voluntarily or deliberately driven there. Easton ordered overall photos taken, a temporary perimeter set, and "Do Not Cross" active scene signs posted. He assigned 2 officers to guard the scene overnight and halted all other search activity nearby to avoid contaminating evidence. Through the windows, he could see the driver's seat pulled close to the wheel, gear shift in P, a dark fabric bag on the passenger seat, a plastic water bottle, and some papers of unknown content. No key in the ignition, interior light off, no major disturbance in the front compartment. On the inside of the windshield was a long, faint condensation streak that had since dried, suggesting the heater had been on for a short time before the car was abandoned. Easton marked the scene with reflective tape, drafted a preliminary report, noting time of discovery 8:42, precise GPS coordinates, and requested laser distance panoramic photos. After initial steps were complete, he contacted the Concord Forensic Services Division directly, requesting a specialist team on site first thing the next morning for evidence collection and analysis. Moore and 2 other officers set up a temporary shelter and portable floodlights to protect the area overnight, and placed an environmental thermometer to record average temperature for later surface evidence comparison. By afternoon, snow was falling heavily again. Easton had a large tarp stretched over the car to prevent new snow from altering the scene. In his end-of-day entry he wrote briefly, "Vehicle located, intact, no forced entry, likely primary evidence scene, hold for forensic unit arrival 0800 hours." As the last light faded over the lake, the silver car stood motionless in the deep snow, now the center of the entire disappearance, where every question converged but no answers yet existed. On the morning of December 2nd, the forensic team from Concord arrived under the direction of crime scene examiner Mark Callahan. Temperature was -10 degrees, snow had stopped, but wind remained strong, complicating evidence preservation. The area around Leslie's silver Honda Civic had been kept exactly as Lieutenant Easton left it overnight. The entire scene perimeter remained intact. Callahan's team erected wind-blocking tents, set up supplemental lighting, and began detailed documentation following standard protocol, panoramic photos, close-ups of every angle of the car, tires, door handles, windshield, surrounding snow, and every object within a 5-meter radius. Each image was tagged with a code and exact timestamp to the second. After photography, Callahan labeled evidence items. A 01 was the plastic fragment collected earlier, confirmed to match the car's paint. B02. The dark bag on the passenger seat, key 03. A Poland Spring water bottle. D042 folded sheets of paper on the driver's side floor. All were sealed and placed into evidence bags per regulation. Windows and handles were dusted for fingerprints, but initial results were poor due to moisture and low temperature blurring any prints. Inside the cabin, technicians used ultraviolet light to check for biological traces, but found no blood or bodily fluids. Driver's seat, steering wheel, and dashboard were undisturbed, with no signs of struggle. In the trunk, all of Leslie's personal items remained: yoga mat, light jacket, sneakers, nothing out of place. Under the chassis, old dried mud indicated the car had traveled a dirt road before the snow started, confirming it was left there sometime before the first major snowfall. Callahan cast the tire tracks with rubber compound for comparison with the marks recorded in the pine forest on November 29th. Preliminary results showed no match, meaning Leslie's car had never been on that trail. Technicians opened the driver's door with specialized tools, photographed the interior in detail, and noted, gear in P, parking brake engaged. Ignition off, no key present. Floor mats were dry, proving the car had been parked early, before snow melted and refroze. Easton observed the entire process, recording each step in the scene report. He paid particular attention to the long condensation streak on the inside windshield, which Callahan confirmed was from the heater running briefly, suggesting someone had sat inside for a short time before leaving. Outside, the snow surface around the car was cracked from freezing wind. Any footprints were completely covered, leaving only a few shallow depressions too vague to size. The team decided not to dig further to avoid disturbing the original snow layer needed for future reconstruction. After more than 4 hours, the survey was complete. The car was loaded onto a flatbed trailer, covered with sealed tarps, and tagged primary scene vehicle, Concord Lab. All collected evidence was sealed separately in chilled containers. Before leaving, Callahan signed the scene handover report, confirming no blood detected, no signs of struggle, no clear biological evidence. Vehicle intact. Deeper lab analysis required. Easton watched the car being lifted onto the truck, its wheels still coated in frosty ice, reflecting the gray light of a winter morning. He knew every answer might be somewhere inside that silent car, and his next task was to discover why Leslie Arden had stopped in this desolate place and never came back. When the Honda Civic was transported back to Concord for forensic examination, Lieutenant Michael Easton returned to the command center in Conway and began the next step in the investigation process, compiling a list of individuals directly connected to the victim. From Leslie Arden's personal records, phone address book, and email account obtained from her family, the investigative team assembled a list of 12 frequent contacts, including coworkers at the community center, yoga class students, a few close friends, and several names that had only recently appeared in her communication history. Easton zeroed in on two names that showed up repeatedly in the 2 weeks prior to Leslie's disappearance: Chris Mallory and Robert Bobby Tarr. According to Leslie's close friend, Chris was the person she met on the evening of November 27th at the Timberline bar, while Bobby was an ex-boyfriend whose relationship had ended in early fall after several heated arguments. Both men were in her phone contacts and had called Leslie on the day she vanished. Easton directed the technical analysis team to extract data from Leslie's recovered cell phone after the SIM card was retrieved from the family's mailbox. The call log duplicate showed Chris Mallory contacting her at 6:41 p.m. and 7:12 p.m., which aligned with the time Leslie said she was going out to meet someone. The final incoming call, received at 9:57 p.m., lasted less than a minute, and its content was unknown. Meanwhile, Bobby Tarr had sent 2 text messages on November 26th and 27th that were clearly upset, demanding that Leslie respond and stop avoiding me. From social media data, Easton confirmed that both men lived in nearby towns, Chris in Tamworth, roughly 65 miles from Conway, working as a pool installer for a private company. Bobby lived in Rochester in southern New Hampshire, working as a freelance construction contractor with a prior record of violating a restraining order in a domestic dispute 3 years earlier. Easton made a note: priority focus, last contact, and prior conflict. He ordered preliminary profiles created for each, including timelines, locations, relationships, and behavior around the time of the disappearance. Beyond the 2 primary persons of interest, all of Leslie's co-workers confirmed she had no conflicts with anyone else, led a stable life, had no debts, and was not involved in any disputes. One yoga student recalled Leslie mentioning an old guy who kept texting her and that it made her uncomfortable, though she hadn't reported it to police. That detail matched Bobby Tarr. Easton instructed the surveillance team to review traffic cameras along Route 16, specifically looking for the red pickup truck captured in the ATM footage, while also requesting verification of Chris Mallory's movements on the night of November 27th. He created a 2-pronged investigation chart, one branch focused on the last person known to have seen Leslie, who might have information about her leaving the bar. The second on the individual with prior conflict and possible motive to harm her. All data was compiled and coded into a file titled Arden Case, Person of Interest Listing, and sent to the state office. At the end of the day, Easton wrote in his report, Situation 2: individuals with direct contact immediately prior to disappearance need to verify travel routes, alibis, and vehicles. Objective: determine victim's final contact. Outside, the snow had stopped falling, but inside the small, brightly lit room that stayed active all night. The list with those 2 names on the desk became the focal point of the entire investigation. 2 paths that might lead to answers about what happened to Leslie Arden after she walked out of the Timberline bar and vanished into the snowy night in Conway. 2 days after the persons of interest list was completed, Lieutenant Michael Easton contacted Chris Mallory for an interview. The meeting took place at the Conway Police Headquarters on the morning of December 4th, in the cold, quiet aftermath of the major snowstorm. Chris arrived on time, wearing a thick wool jacket, looking tired but cooperative. Easton explained the purpose of the session and stated that this was standard procedure in a missing person investigation. Chris said he had met Leslie through mutual friends at a gym in Tamworth about a month earlier, chatted a few times, and then arranged to meet on the evening of November 27th. According to him, they had beers, talked pleasantly, and there was no argument. Around 10 p.m., Leslie said she had to leave early because she had a class the next morning and left the bar a few minutes before he did. He claimed he stayed another half hour, said goodbye to some acquaintances, and then headed home. However, when Easton cross-checked this statement with witness statements from the Timberline bar, the departure times didn't match. Bar staff confirmed Leslie left around 10 p.m., while Chris was seen walking out less than 5 minutes later, with no evidence he stayed an additional half hour. The ATM camera across the street recorded a red pickup stopping at 10:12 p.m., but it did not capture Chris's vehicle. When asked, Chris insisted he drove a dark green Ford Ranger, left Conway after 10:20 p.m., and arrived home around midnight. Easton requested verification of the travel timeline and called the owner of a convenience store in Tamworth, where Chris said he stopped for coffee on the way home. The owner confirmed a man matching the description came in near 11 p.m., but could not be 100% certain. Although Chris's statement had a few inconsistencies, Easton detected no signs of resistance or panic. He answered calmly, voluntarily provided his phone records, and agreed to give a DNA sample for comparison with traces recovered from the Honda Civic. The Concord technical team processed the test the same day. Results later showed Chris Mallory's DNA did not match any biological evidence found in the car. There were no matching fingerprints and no indication he had ever been inside the vehicle. Easton did not yet remove Chris from the suspect list, but noted, direct involvement unlikely, statement requires further verification. He ordered continued checking of Chris's cell phone location data for the night of November 27. Records from the carrier showed his phone connected to a tower in Tamworth at 11:12 p.m., consistent with the route he described. In the combined report, Easton wrote, "Subject cooperative, no serious contradictions detected. Shift focus to the remaining lead." The interview ended after 2 hours. Chris left the building silently, stepping out onto the gray snow, his face showing worry but no evasion. When the door closed, Easton sat alone, flipping through the files, staring at the remaining name on the list. Robert Bobby Tarr, the man with an unstable past and a complicated history with Leslie Arden. He knew the next stage of the investigation would not be as straightforward as the conversation that had just ended, because their past held far more conflict than the records revealed. On the afternoon of December 5th, Lieutenant Michael Easton interviewed Robert Bobby Tarr at the Rochester Police Headquarters after serving a legal summons. Bobby arrived with his teenage daughter, appearing calm but somewhat guarded. He was a freelance construction contractor who lived nearly 100 miles from Conway and had a 1999 restraining order violation with a former partner, but no serious criminal convictions. When asked about Leslie Arden, Bobby said they had broken up in early September and had nothing left to say to each other. He claimed that on the evening of November 27th, he was home all night with his daughter, watched a movie, and went to bed around 10 p.m. His daughter, Shelby, corroborated this, saying her dad never left the house that night. Easton recorded the statements, but when he cross-referenced them with phone data, records from the carrier showed a total of 8 calls and 3 texts sent from Bobby's number to Leslie's phone between 7 p.m. and 10:45 p.m. on November 27th. The last 2 calls were placed at 10:11 p.m. and 10:43 p.m., times that coincided with Leslie being seen leaving the Timberline bar and losing contact. When questioned about these calls, Bobby became evasive, saying he just wanted to clear things up because she hadn't answered earlier messages and denied threatening or stalking her. Easton noticed Bobby's voice changed noticeably, slightly shaky and slower, whenever specific times were mentioned. When asked about vehicles, Bobby said he owned a 1994 red Ford Ranger, but that it had been sitting in the garage because he was replacing the spark plugs. When Easton asked to see the truck, Bobby hesitated briefly before agreeing but said the garage was locked and he would open it the next day. Easton requested the exact address and recorded it in the report. Under legal procedure, however, a search required a warrant unless there was clear probable cause. The evidence at that point consisted only of coincidences, a red truck, numerous calls, and a former relationship. Still, the coincidences were striking enough for Easton to take special note. He had the technical team compare Bobby's cell phone signals from the night of November 27th with tower data. Results showed his phone lost signal from 10:05 p.m. to 11:10 p.m. and then reappeared near Rochester, an hour-long gap that almost perfectly matched the window when Leslie disappeared. When asked about it, Bobby seemed flustered, saying he might have left the phone in the truck or there was no signal. Easton did not argue, simply noting timeline discrepancy. Verify. The interview lasted nearly 3 hours. Bobby maintained an outwardly cooperative demeanor, but avoided any specific details about the past relationship. He insisted he hadn't seen Leslie in months and had no reason to hurt her. When asked to voluntarily provide a DNA sample, Bobby said he would think about it and needed to consult his attorney. After the session, Easton did not yet have sufficient grounds to request a search warrant for the house or vehicle. He knew the current suspicions were only circumstantial and could not yet be converted into hard evidence. In the report sent back to Concord, he wrote, "Subject shows evasive pattern, data inconsistency noted, but insufficient probable cause for warrant." On the drive back to Conway, snow began falling lightly again, and inside the vehicle, there was only the sound of the radio mixed with Easton's heavy thoughts. He understood that the more than 1 hour signal gap could be random, or it could be the key to the entire case. On the morning of December 6th, after completing the initial interviews and finding no new leads, Lieutenant Michael Easton decided to expand the search around the Lake Ossipee area, where Leslie Arden's Honda Civic had been discovered. The operation was coordinated among state police, a water rescue team, and volunteer divers from the Portsmouth Emergency Response Center. The lake was divided into 4 sectors: the shallow water near the shore where the car was found, the central area approximately 10 meters deep, the western edge with muddy terrain and rotted trees, and the snowy shoreline along the pine forest. Easton ordered side-scan sonar to sweep the bottom for anomalous objects while establishing a cordoned search corridor with reflective rope to preserve any potential evidence locations. The technical team deployed at first light. Strong cold wind caused thin mist to rise from the lake surface. The sonar system began emitting steady pings, producing waveform images on the monitors. Most returns were rocks and branches, with no large objects of interest. While the divers prepared to enter the water, a shore patrol on the eastern bank discovered a small object protruding from the snow, about 80 meters north of where Leslie's car had been parked. It was a blue wool glove with gray stripes at the wrist, half buried among frozen grass roots. The technical team immediately secured the area, using cold preservation covers and plastic forceps to collect the item according to protocol. Easton arrived shortly afterward and compared it to the description of Leslie's personal items in her file. She was known to wear blue gloves in cold weather. The glove was intact, with only faint grayish stains on the surface and no tears or burns. Easton logged, possible personal belonging, distance 80 mne from vehicle. He ordered photographs from 3 angles, precise GPS measurements, and the location plotted on the scene map. At the same time, divers checked the shallow water zone, descending 4 to 5 meters, but thick mud and poor visibility slowed progress. They recovered a few pieces of rusted metal and an old glass bottle, nothing relevant. By midday, the entire team returned to the command post to warm up and compile data. The glove was packaged, labeled Evidence Item E05, and transported the same day to the Concord Forensic Lab for DNA and fingerprint analysis. Easton specifically requested comparison with Leslie's DNA profile and samples already collected from persons of interest. He also directed micro-CT scanning of the fabric fibers to determine length of exposure to the cold environment, a factor that could help estimate when the glove was left behind. In the afternoon, the sonar team completed a final sweep of the lake with no additional hits. As daylight faded, a thin layer of ice began forming along the northern edge, reflecting the purple of the sunset. Easton looked along the snowy strip where the glove had been found, sensing something odd, as if someone had left the car, walked deeper toward the woods, and then simply vanished. He kept the thought to himself. Only signing the day's final report, search extended. 1 potential evidence item recovered, pending forensic analysis. That night, the blue wool glove became the first item that could reconnect Leslie Arden's trail since she left the Timberline Bar on that snowy late November night, and the only clue keeping hope in the investigation from being completely buried beneath the icy surface of Lake Ossipee. 3 days after the blue wool glove was sent to Concord, preliminary forensic results were forwarded to the Carroll County Investigation Office. The state lab report stated the fabric fibers remained structurally intact and suitable for DNA and trace biological analysis. Technicians extracted samples from two separate areas, the wrist cuff and the inside palm. The cuff sample yielded female DNA that matched Leslie Arden's genetic profile 100%, confirming the glove belonged to the victim. This was the first direct forensic evidence since the case began. However, what caught the examiner's attention was trace male DNA of unknown origin found among the fibers inside the palm, present as a low-concentration mixed sample. Initial analysis suggested it was likely epithelial cells, not blood or bodily fluids, but the quantity was too low and slightly degraded from prolonged cold exposure. The lab ran the sample against the state and federal CODIS databases with no hits. The report stated clearly, mixed DNA sample, male contributor undetermined, quantity insufficient for full profile. Easton received the results on the afternoon of December 9th, while at the temporary command center in Conway. He read every line carefully, underlining 2 points. Match with Leslie and unidentified male DNA. The presence of male DNA inside the victim's glove could be incidental from everyday contact, or it could indicate another person was present before or after Leslie disappeared. He contacted the lead forensic technician directly to rule out contamination. He was told the extraction protocol eliminated environmental error and contamination risk was low. Easton ordered the original sample preserved and a duplicate dataset sent to an independent lab in Boston for cross-verification. In his internal memo he noted, primary evidence confirmed, secondary trace indicates possible contact, pending identification. At the same time, he compared the new DNA to the existing samples from Chris Mallory and Bobby Tarr. Neither matched. This complicated every investigative avenue. Crucial evidence proved Leslie had been at the scene, but the person who touched her glove was not among those already tested. Easton held a short briefing with his team, presented the findings, and ordered a complete recanvass of everyone who had any contact or worked with Leslie in the 2 weeks before her disappearance, including repairmen, installers, or clients from her yoga classes. He also uploaded the new profile to the federal system for broader comparison against unidentified DNA databases. However, the mixed, low-copy sample made constructing a full genetic profile impossible at that time. In the report's final note, the technician wrote, "Trace indicates male contributor, low copy number. Recommend re-extraction if secondary sample available." Easton knew that without additional evidence, identifying this man was nearly impossible. Still, the evidence confirmed one thing: Leslie had left her car and walked wearing that blue wool glove, at least, until she disappeared into the snowy cold around Lake Ossipee. And in that brief window, another man, identity still unknown, had been very close to her. Immediately after receiving the DNA results from the lab, Lieutenant Michael Easton shifted focus to the remaining physical evidence, the tire tracks recorded in the western woods during the November 29th search. Rubber casts of the impressions had been sent to Concord at the same time as the Honda Civic, but comparison results had only just been finalized. The technical report identified the tire size as 265/70R17 with a distinctive all-terrain tread pattern commonly found on late 1990s to early 2000s Ford F-150 pickups. The secondary groove shape and lug spacing matched the reference F-150 pattern exactly. Easton cross-referenced this with vehicle registration records in the Conway and Rochester areas. Within the investigative radius, there were 5 legally registered F-150s, one of which was owned by Robert Bobby Tarr, the same make and model year he claimed was sitting in the garage, getting spark plugs replaced on the night Leslie disappeared. The coincidence prompted Easton to immediately request a search warrant for Bobby's truck to compare tread patterns, but under legal procedure, the request required approval from the Carroll County Court based on reasonable cause, linking the suspect or vehicle directly to the crime scene evidence. The prosecutor assigned to the case, Andrew Marden, reviewed the file and determined that the tire evidence only confirmed a vehicle type, not a specific truck. Meanwhile, The DNA from the glove did not match Bobby, and there was still no direct evidence placing him at the scene. The warrant was denied for lack of sufficient probable cause, linking physical evidence to suspect. Easton received the denial from the prosecutor's office on the morning of December 11th, feeling a mix of disappointment and frustration. He understood that in rural New Hampshire, Ford F-150s were extremely common. Nearly every household owned one, and tire type alone was not enough for a warrant. Nevertheless, the combination of the tire match, Bobby's hour-long cell signal gap, and the prior volatile relationship made it impossible to ignore. Easton had the technical team re-examine scene photos, zooming in on the tire impressions. From a side angle he noticed a small detail. The outer edge of the left rear tire showed uneven wear, indicating one tire had been running at low pressure for an extended period. He documented the characteristic, noting that if the actual truck could be inspected, an exact match could be confirmed. Although the warrant was denied, Easton still instructed surveillance to log the location of Bobby's garage, times of entry and exit, and the vehicle's condition in the coming days to ensure the tires were not repaired or replaced. In the report to his superiors he wrote, "Tire impression consistent with Ford F-150 pattern, owner of interest, Robert Tarr. No warrant issued, lacking direct evidence. Continue monitoring." By the end of the day, the sky had turned dull gray and snow began falling again, gradually covering the trails around the lake where those tire tracks had once been imprinted. For Easton, every tiny detail, even just a rubber groove in the snow, remained the only remaining link between the abandoned silver car and the man who claimed he had been home all night. In early 2003, as winter gave way and the ice on Lake Ossipee began to thaw, Lieutenant Michael Easton organized 2 additional search operations in the hope of finding any remaining traces around the area where the vehicle had been abandoned. The rescue team used metal detectors, ground-penetrating radar, and cadaver dogs trained to detect the scent of human remains, but after weeks of effort, the result was still zero. No body, no weapon, no suspicious objects were found. The forest surrounding the lake, frozen and snow-covered throughout the winter, had erased any traces that might have existed. No new witnesses came forward. No one had seen Leslie since she left the Timberline bar. The car, the glove, and a few small samples became everything that remained of the case. The male DNA analysis from the glove did not match any database entries, and the results could not be taken further. The forensic report concluded, insufficient data to determine cause or time of death. Criminal act cannot yet be established. Prosecutor Marden was forced to admit there was no basis to request new arrest warrants or search warrants. The investigation fell into a prolonged state of stagnation. Easton and his team held their final meeting at the end of March, presenting the entire process and preliminary conclusions. The victim was missing with unknown cause. Likelihood of survival low. The file was classified missing person, foul play suspected, then transferred to cold case status in accordance with state regulations. On April 4, 2003, the final note was entered into the system. No new leads. Case status: unsolved, presumed dead. All physical evidence, including the glove, fabric samples, copies of crime scene photos, lab reports, and tire track reports, was sealed in storage boxes labeled Arden Case, C0 to 111. These boxes were moved to the Cold Case Evidence Vault at the New Hampshire State Police Investigative Services Center in Concord. Before handover, Easton personally signed the evidence transfer form, his handwriting even and detached. After nearly 4 months, he had to close the case without answers. An outcome he always regarded as a personal failure. As he left the storage facility, spring snow fell lightly in the yard, melting slowly on the pavement. Beneath the status, presumed dead, the name Leslie Arden lay quietly among hundreds of other files, people who had vanished from New Hampshire, leaving behind only unanswered questions. After Leslie Arden's file was transferred to the Cold Case Archive, the case gradually faded into obscurity. In 2004, Robert "Bobby" Tarr sold his small house in Rochester and moved to Vermont, where he started working as a construction contractor for a civil engineering company and married a local woman. They had a son, and his life appeared stable and completely detached from everything that had happened in New Hampshire. Old acquaintances said Bobby rarely mentioned Conway or Leslie. He avoided any conversation related to the past and had practically erased all traces of that period. Chris Mallory left Tamworth, moved to Massachusetts, and worked in mechanical engineering, a quiet life in which no one still connected him to the old disappearance. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Michael Easton continued serving for a few more years at the State Police Major Crime Unit, handling many other cases but always considering the Leslie Arden case the most unfinished file of his career. In 2008, he submitted his retirement papers after more than 20 years of service, moved to a small town near Concord, and spent his time gardening and advising on training programs for young investigators. Occasionally, during workshops, he still referred to the case as a classic example of the limits of field investigation when direct physical evidence is lacking, though his voice always slowed when he reached Leslie's name. The cold case storage facility in Concord continued to fill with old file boxes over those years. Each year, only a handful of cases were selected for re-examination if new leads appeared. The file coded C02111, Arden, Leslie, missing person, presumed dead, remained untouched on the fourth shelf. Among other disappearances from northern parts of the state, thick dust covered the lids, and the ceiling labels had yellowed. Young technicians occasionally opened the vault for inventory, but no one lingered long over a set of documents that had gone more than half a decade without updates. Outside, the world changed rapidly. DNA technology advanced, national databases expanded, yet for cases without sufficiently large samples or new evidence, everything remained frozen on paper. Leslie's family still sent a letter every year to the state police asking for progress, but the reply was always the same: no new information. Time gradually blurred all memories, leaving only a few notes in the file and names scattered across the country. From 2003 to 2016, not a single trace, not a single call, not a single discovery was added. The disappearance of Leslie Arden became one of hundreds of inactive files, marked inactive, reopened pending new evidence, lying quietly among the cold storage racks in Concord, awaiting a slim chance to see the light of investigation again. In 2017, after more than a decade of stalled cold cases, the state of New Hampshire officially established the Cold Case Unit under the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, headquartered on the grounds of the Forensic Center in Concord. The unit's mission was to review unsolved disappearances and homicides from the 1970s through the early 2000s, using new forensic technologies unavailable at the time. During the first inventory sweep, technicians were tasked with reopening every file to cross-reference data and assess the potential for recovering evidence. One of the youngest technicians on the team, 29-year-old Abby Vance, a specialist in advanced DNA analysis, was assigned to the group handling disappearances with no recovered body, including file hash NH0241189, the former designation of the Leslie Arden case. When she opened the evidence box, Abby saw that everything had been perfectly preserved, still sealed since 2003, one navy blue wool glove labeled E05, mixed DNA extracts, and copies of crime scene photos. She read the old lab report and immediately noticed a small note at the bottom: trace indicates male contributor, low copy number. Recommend re-extraction if secondary sample available. At that time, the lab had only basic PCR capability and lacked the sensitivity to separate mixed DNA strands. Abby knew that the full STR technology rolled out statewide in 2010 could decode such samples, even with extremely small amounts of DNA. She added the case to the priority retesting list. In her memo to superiors, Abby proposed subject case NH0241189, existing mixed DNA, potential for partial STR profile using enhanced extraction. The proposal was approved, and the original glove sample was transferred to the State Molecular Analysis Lab for reprocessing under the new protocol. While awaiting results, Abby read the entire old file, Lieutenant Michael Easton's reports, the interview transcripts of the two men, and the crime scene photos. She noted the meticulous attention to every detail. Everything had been documented almost perfectly, only technological limitations had halted the original investigation. It felt like she was speaking directly to the previous investigator, so she wrote a small note on the file cover, "Reopen due to forensic advancement. Possible link to male DNA trace." On July 14, 2017, case #NH0-24189 was officially placed on the active cold case list with the classification Active Forensic Review. In the assignment table, the lead technician was clearly listed, Abby Vance, DNA specialist. As the dim afternoon light reflected off the thin layer of dust covering the old evidence boxes, Leslie Arden, the woman who vanished from Conway on a snowy night in 2002, was called by name once more, not by a witness or a detective, but by a young technician who believed that within those cold wool fibers there still remained a genetic chain strong enough to tell the missing part of the story. The re-examination of the glove sample in case #NH0-24189 began in late July 2017 under the direct supervision of technician Abby Vance and the New Hampshire State Forensic Laboratory's DNA analysis team. The material, taken from the inside palm area where a mixed DNA trace had previously been detected but was insufficient for analysis, was thawed, treated with a new generation extraction solution, then amplified using STR and YSTR techniques. Thanks to the high sensitivity of the system, the process could recover even heavily degraded DNA samples over time. For 2 weeks, short sequence bands were separated by the analyzer in cycles, with every step recorded as electronic graphs. When the final results appeared, the screen displayed 2 distinct genetic profiles, a female profile that matched Leslie Arden's stored reference exactly, and a previously unidentified male profile within the internal database. Abby double-checked the entire procedure to rule out contamination, then submitted the male sample to the National CODIS database and the Vermont State Crime Database for comparison. 2 days later, the system returned an automatic red flag alert, match found, partial YSTR concordance. The male DNA matched the profile of an individual arrested for assault in 1997 in Vermont, named Robert Edward Tarr, born 1969. In the old records, Robert Tarr's DNA had been collected when he was briefly detained for causing injury during a construction site fight, then released for lack of evidence. The STR/YSTR match probability between the glove sample and Tarr's profile reached 99.98%, leaving virtually no reasonable doubt about the source. When Abby read the result report, her whole body tensed. This was the same man mentioned in Lieutenant Michael Easton's report nearly 15 years earlier. She immediately compiled a summary report that included electropherograms, STR sequence charts, and cross-verification from the Vermont lab. The report stated clearly, evidence E05 contains male DNA profile consistent with Robert E. Tarr. Confidence, 99.98%. The final verification section bore the signatures of 3 technicians and the laboratory director. Abby sent copies of the results to the cold case unit commander and the state prosecutor. Word spread quickly within the agency, as this was one of the unit's first successful recoveries of a complete genetic profile from evidence more than a decade old. On August 4, 2017, case #NH0-24189 was officially updated to DNA match confirmed. Reopen investigation. That same day, all old records on Robert Bobby Tarr were pulled from the database. The 2002 entry that once read interviewed, no direct evidence, no search warrant, now had new forensic documentation attached. From Abby's perspective, everything now fit together. The man who claimed he was home with his daughter on the night of November 27th, the red Ford F-150 pickup, the over 1 hour cell phone signal gap, and now his own genetic trace inside the glove Leslie had been wearing before she disappeared. She was not an investigator, but she understood that with this evidence, the case was no longer simply a suspicious disappearance, but now showed clear signs of criminal conduct. Before leaving the lab, Abby paused for a long time in front of the old evidence box, looking through the frosted glass at the glove preserved in its new sealed bag. The navy blue wool fibers looked perfectly ordinary, but they now carried the most conclusive proof the case had ever had. After 15 years of being forgotten, a genetic sequence less than 200 characters long had reopened the door to the Leslie Arden case. And with it, the chance to finally find the answer to what happened on that snowy night in Conway in 2002. After the DNA results confirmed the male trace matched Robert Bobby Tarr, the cold case unit continued reviewing all remaining physical evidence in file hash NH0241189 for additional visual corroboration. During inventory, technician Abby Vance discovered a sealed 35mm film canister from 2002 with a faint pencil note, Timberline Bar, the 27th of November. The roll had been collected as evidence inside the bar, but was deemed underexposed at the time and never developed due to lighting issues. With modern technology, the cold case digital imaging lab could recover damaged film using infrared scanning and color range reconstruction. Abby handed the canister to senior imaging specialist Patrick Dorsey, a former FBI technician. After 2 days of processing, all 24 frames were recovered. Most showed only the interior of the Timberline bar, tables, chairs, and neon reflections. But frame number 17 immediately drew attention. It captured the bar counter with Leslie Arden sitting sideways, holding a beer, and behind her, a large mirror running the length of the wall. In the faint reflection at the corner of the mirror, appeared the blurred image of a man wearing a knit cap and a brown jacket, standing close to the bar. His face turned toward Leslie. Enlarging the frame made the features clearer: stocky build, square jaw, collar turned up. When compared to Robert Tarr's 1997 arrest booking photo, the characteristics matched to a striking degree: facial shape, nose bridge, and even a small scar below the left ear. The photograph was sent for independent analysis to the Federal Forensic Image Lab. After facial landmark ratio comparison, the result was an 87% match, sufficient to conclude, high probability, the suspect was present in the same location as the victim at the last known sighting. This discovery instantly shifted the entire direction of the investigation. In the 2002 file, Bobby had insisted he had not seen Leslie since their breakup in early September. Now, the recovered mirror image showed he was inside the Timberline bar on the night of November 27th, just minutes before Leslie left the bar and vanished. Abby prepared a detailed report describing the film recovery technique, facial match percentage, and the relative positions of Leslie and the man in the photo. Everything was added to the supplemental file for the state prosecutor. On the cold case commander's desk, the photo was printed in large format. The mirror reflection made the scene both hazy and real, as if that moment had waited 15 years to reveal itself. When the team reviewed it, no one spoke. Everything now seemed obvious. The man in the photo was none other than Bobby Tarr, the man who claimed he was home with his daughter that snowy night, the man whose DNA was now found in Leslie Arden's glove. Together with the genetic evidence, the photograph became the first visual proof of his presence at the scene. Abby archived the original in the digital vault and signed the report, frame hash 17, recovered reflection. Subject identified as R.E. Tarr, verified presence. After nearly 15 years, an old forgotten roll of film in an evidence bag had produced the clearest image yet of Leslie Arden's final moment inside the Timberline bar. After the restored photograph from the 35mm film roll confirmed the presence of Robert Bobby Tarr at Timberline bar, the cold case unit decided to reopen the entire communication data set for case hash NH0241189 to strengthen the technical evidence. Most of the 2002 phone records had previously only been retained in printed form, but with cooperation from AT&T and assistance from the Federal Technical Division, the original logs were retrieved from backup storage systems. The recovery process took nearly 3 weeks because the old data format was incompatible with current software, requiring manual line-by-line decryption. Network technician James Lowell was responsible for reconstructing the records, cross-referencing the mobile subscriber number of Leslie Arden with the landline registered under Robert Tarr's name in Rochester. When the data table was completed, one detail immediately stood out: between 2043 and 2258, on November 27, 2002. The exact night Leslie disappeared, there had been a total of 7 consecutive calls placed from Bobby's home phone to Leslie's mobile. The first 6 lasted only a few seconds each. The final one lasted more than 2 minutes and ended at 2258. The exact time Leslie was recorded leaving Timberline Bar. Previously, this data had not been in the file because investigators only had copies from the local carrier, while Bobby's phone line used an out-of-state connection. When cross-checked, Abby Vance confirmed the same area code and the same old address belonging to him. The extracted records also clearly showed the signal tower location. All calls in that time frame originated from the area along Route 16 near the town of Ossipee, not from Bobby's house in Rochester as he had claimed. The location deviation was just over 1 mile from where the Honda Civic was recovered. The technical report noted, call origin location, Ossipee area tower, approx. 1.3 miles from recovered vehicle. This discovery forced the entire cold case team into an emergency meeting. The old data left no room for doubt. Bobby's landline could have been used through a temporary mobile link or an out-of-area repeater, something only someone physically present in the Ossipee area at that moment could have done. The state prosecutor requested verification of the type of equipment Bobby owned in 2002. From warranty records, the technical team determined he had used a Panasonic cordless handset with a range exceeding 300 meters that could connect directly to the landline via a peripheral base unit, a type common among construction contractors who needed to stay in touch while away from job sites. This explained why the call log still showed origin home line, even though the handset could actually be far away. Abby and the data team compared the duration of each call with the timing of Leslie's text messages to her close friend Nina. Leslie's final message was sent at 21:10 with the content: "Everything's fine, but it feels a little weird." Roughly an hour and a half later, the barrage of calls from Bobby began. Easton, though long retired, was invited to consult with the cold case team. He looked at the long call log and remained silent for a very long time. The numbers on the paper confirmed what he had suspected, but could not prove in 2002. Bobby Tarr was not home the night Leslie disappeared. He was right near where the car was found. The consolidated report signed on September 17, 2017 concluded, recovered AT&T, it log confirms 7 calls from R. Tarr residence line to victim's mobile between 2043, 2258 HRS. The 27th of November, 2002, call origin traced to Ossipee region, proximate to recovery site. With this evidence, the old case timeline was officially shattered. After 15 years, telecommunications technology had returned the silent voice of that snowy night, electronic signals recording the man who had insisted he was home, but who had actually called Leslie just minutes before she vanished from the world. After the phone data was recovered, the cold case unit investigation team shifted to reconstructing Robert Bobby Tarr's entire possible travel route on the night of November 27, 2002. Based on the cell tower locations identified from the final calls, the state's digital mapping specialists analyzed the most logical route, connecting his home in Rochester to the Ossipee, Conway area where Leslie Arden's car was found. The results showed the shortest route ran through Wolfboro heading north, taking 42 minutes under normal traffic conditions. Abby Vance and data technician James Lowell continued cross-referencing potential stops along the way. They located an old credit card receipt in Bobby Tarr's financial records, issued by a local bank, showing a transaction at 2117 on November 27, 2002, at a Gulf gas station on Route 28. In Wolfboro, the $26 transaction was clearly for 10 gallons of unleaded gasoline, the exact fuel type used in the 1994 Ford F-150 he owned at the time. This data had never previously been in the file because banking systems back then were not linked online. Only microfiche copies existed, now recovered during the cold case financial review, combined with the first call originating from the Ossipee area at 2043. The specialist determined Bobby left Rochester sometime before 20 o'clock, drove the Wolfboro-Conway route, stopped for gas at 2117, and continued north. The timing aligned almost perfectly with the period Leslie was still at Timberline Bar, and also matched the final text she sent, saying she felt a little weird. When presenting the results to the state prosecutor, Abby showed a travel chart with 3 main markers: departure from home, refueling, arrival in the Ossipee area. Based on distance and travel time, Bobby could have reached Conway around 2150, just 10 minutes before Leslie left the bar. The analysis report stated clearly, probable route reconstruction indicates suspect departed Rochester approx. 20 o'clock HRS, refueled at Wolfboro 2117 HRS, entered Ossipee, Conway corridor before 2150 HRS. Easton, serving as advisor, confirmed this was the exact route he had suspected in 2002, but lacked the data to prove. When additional weather and road condition data from that night were compared, the simulation showed actual travel time could have been slightly longer due to light snow, yet still within 48 minutes, perfectly matching the call timestamps discovered in the ATAN log. The prosecutor requested visual confirmation of the gas station evidence. The investigation team accessed Gulf Energy's transaction archive and located a blurry November 2002 security camera tape stored on magnetic media, with only a few readable frames remaining. In one frame timestamped 2118, the silhouette of a dark red pickup truck appeared, the cab matching a 1994 Ford F-150. The license plate was obscured by snow, but the build of the man holding the pump nozzle resembled Bobby, stocky, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark, knit cap. Combining this chain of data, the cold case unit officially confirmed Bobby Tarr left home on the evening of November 27, drove the Wolfboro-Conway route, stopped for gas midway, and was present in the Ossipee area at the exact time Leslie Arden disappeared. As Abby saved the full report into the system, the final line in the file appeared: confirmed presence and travel pattern, suspect timeline established. After 15 years, the mysterious journey of that snowy night in 2002 had finally been restored. Each cold timestamp now stood out clearly, like footprints once buried, leading straight to the man who had lied about never leaving the house. On September 22, 2017, after the travel data chain and phone logs were verified, the New Hampshire state prosecutor filed a request with the Concord Court for a search warrant for Robert Bobby Tarr's home in Springfield, Vermont. The application was over 200 pages long and included the matching STR DNA results, the restored 35mm film images showing he was present at Timberline Bar, and the travel evidence demonstrating he left Rochester on the night of November 27, 2002. This time, the state judge reviewed it and determined there was sufficient legal basis establishing direct connection between the evidence, the suspect, and the location to be searched. The warrant was signed at 9:45 a.m. and valid for 48 hours. The cold case investigation team coordinated with Vermont police and executed it the same day, approaching Bobby's 2-story house on the outskirts of Springfield, along with the wooden shed behind it. Bobby was not home, but his wife was asked to leave the area while the technical team conducted the search according to procedure. The rooms in the main house were tidy and yielded nothing noteworthy, but while checking the shed, forensic technician Marcus Hill discovered an old locked metal cabinet in the north corner. After prying it open, it contained assorted items, mechanic tools, paint cans, photo boxes, and a few dusty cloth bags. Inside one brown leather bag, Hill found a Nikon f335mm film camera, professional model, with a 50mm lens, still wearing its original strap. The serial number engraved on the bottom matched the information on the purchase receipt. Leslie Arden's family had provided in 2001 the gift she bought herself after earning her yoga instructor certification. The device was immediately sealed as Exhibit R12 and transferred to the mobile forensics lab. While continuing the search, the team also discovered an undeveloped roll of film and several prints of snow-covered landscapes with no dates. Easton, notified through the advisory line, instantly recognized the significance. This was the camera Leslie had with her the night she disappeared, but was never found in her car. Its presence proved someone had accessed her personal belongings after she went missing. That same afternoon, technicians lifted fingerprints from the camera body using magnetic powder and photographed every button and surface digitally. Preliminary results recorded at least 4 complete latent prints on the grip and underside. When run through AFIS, 3 of the 4 matched 100% with Robert Tarr's fingerprint samples stored from a 1997 assault case. The report noted, latent prints recovered from Nikon F3 body, matched to Ari Tarr, confidence 100%. Additionally, no prints from Leslie were found on the exterior surfaces, possibly wiped clean. That same day, the photo lab determined the film inside the camera was still recoverable. Developing and digitization were performed immediately in Concord, under Abby Vance's supervision. The first images were mostly snowy scenes around Conway and a few interior shots of Timberline Bar, matching the exact time frame of Leslie's disappearance, proving this was indeed the camera she carried on November 27. When the fingerprint results were double verified, the state prosecutor signed a supplemental seizure order confirming the Nikon F3 belonged to the victim and had been located in the suspect's possession. This discovery strengthened the chain of physical evidence directly linking Bobby Tarr to Leslie's personal property. The investigation report stated, property of victim recovered at suspect's residence, fingerprint match confirmed. That night, the cold case team held an emergency meeting in Concord. Everything that had been missing from the 2003 file, concrete physical evidence, genetic proof, travel records, presence confirmation, was now gradually coming to light. As Abby sealed the Nikon F3 into its evidence box, she looked through the frosted glass and thought of the blue wool gloves found near the lake and the reflection in the Timberline Bar mirror. The scattered pieces of the 2002 disappearance were now fitting together into a straight line, and at its end stood the name Robert Bobby Tarr, the only shadow that had never vanished from New Hampshire's cold evidence. On September 25, 2017, after completing the search and seizing evidence from the Springfield residence, Robert Bobby Tarr was summoned to the New Hampshire State Prosecutor's Office for a supplemental interview under federal investigation procedure. The session took place in an interrogation room in Concord, attended by 2 cold case unit investigators and the suspect's legal representative. From the start, Bobby remained calm and denied any involvement in Leslie Arden's disappearance. He claimed the Nikon F3 camera had been bought at an estate auction in Vermont a few years earlier, and that he had no idea who the previous owner was. When asked why the serial number exactly matched Leslie's purchase receipt, Bobby paused for several seconds and said, "Coincidence." Regarding the fingerprints, he explained that he often cleaned and repaired lenses, so prints would be normal. The explanation did not convince the investigators. The evidence already showed Bobby's DNA inside Leslie's gloves, his reflection in the Timberline Bar mirror on the night of November 27, phone data placing him in Ossipee, the Wolfboro gas receipt, and now the victim's personal camera. The once scattered pieces were connecting, yet Bobby stubbornly stayed silent when confronted with the matches. When investigators reminded him he had previously stated he hadn't seen Leslie since September, Bobby replied that he might have remembered wrong and that running into each other at a bar wasn't a big deal. He insisted he left the bar before Leslie and had no idea where she went afterward. His calm demeanor was tinged with slight fatigue, but his eyes betrayed tension every time Lake Ossipee was mentioned. After nearly 2 hours of questioning, the prosecutor ended the session to prepare the new evidence comparison. At the same time, the cold case unit sent a formal invitation to Lieutenant Michael Easton, the original 2002 case officer, asking him to return as special advisor. Though retired for nearly 10 years, Easton accepted the same day, left his home in Concord, and arrived at the unit the next morning. Walking into the briefing room, he received the familiar case file, now twice as thick, filled with new notes. DNA match, confirmed travel route, recovered evidence. He read silently all morning. Each page rekindled memories of the time he thought he had failed. That afternoon, he was invited to attend Bobby's second interview with the cold case team. This time, Easton's presence visibly changed the room's atmosphere. Bobby looked at him and momentarily faltered, recognizing the face that had questioned him 15 years earlier. Easton sat across the table, voice low and deliberate, repeating the same old questions. On the night of November 27th, where were you between 20 o'clock and 23 o'clock? Bobby answered exactly as he had in 2002, at home with my daughter. Easton placed the stack of papers on the table and read one by one the gas station receipt at 2117, the Ossipee call log at 2243, the DNA results, the fingerprints on the camera, then concluded with, "Everything says you were not home." Bobby narrowed his eyes, forced a smile, and said, "I don't know where you people dug this stuff up, but I have nothing to hide." Easton watched his expression, the familiar defensiveness he had seen in suspects holding it together just before they cracked. The interview lasted another hour with no confession, but the recording captured every reaction Bobby had to each piece of evidence. Shifting gaze, hands gripping the chair when the Nikon was mentioned, and a hoarse voice when Easton asked, "Do you know where she was found?" Though still insufficient for an arrest, that conversation showed the boundary between silence and truth had grown paper thin. When it ended, Easton stepped into the hallway, looked at the dim light filtering through the Concord window, and felt that the case he had been forced to close 15 years ago was now reopening page by page, and the man carrying the answers had been sitting right in front of him, waiting only for the right moment to say the final thing. Nearly 3 weeks after the last interview, the cold case unit and the state prosecutor finalized the complete evidence file in the Leslie Arden disappearance. The consolidated report, over 300 pages long, was submitted to the New Hampshire Attorney General's office, with every element arranged chronologically and forensically. First came the STR/YSTR DNA results from the blue wool gloves, confirming Robert Bobby Tarr's presence with absolute certainty. Next was the photographic evidence, the restored 35mm frames from the Nikon F3, showing Bobby in the Timberline bar mirror on the night of November 27, 2002, along with the dark red 1994 Ford F-150 silhouette on the Gulf Station camera at 2118, the same day. Hitand phone data confirmed 7 consecutive calls from his home line to Leslie's mobile while she was still in Conway. The transaction receipt, tower-based location tracking, and the physical evidence of Leslie's personal camera, found in Bobby's shed with matching fingerprints, formed a complete chain. The report's conclusion was co-signed by Abby Vance and Michael Easton. Physical, biological, and circumstantial evidence established probable cause, linking Robert E. Tarr to the disappearance and presumed homicide of Leslie Arden. The file was presented to Chief Prosecutor Andrew Carter for a formal arrest warrant. After review, Carter confirmed the file satisfied all requirements of New Hampshire Criminal Procedure, Section 594-10, authorizing arrest of a suspect in a disappearance, supported by evidence constituting a serious felony. On October 9, 2018, the file was forwarded to Concord Superior Court for final approval. The next morning, Judge Linda Kerr signed arrest warrant number 18417W, listing Robert Edward Tarr for second-degree murder, in connection with the disappearance of Leslie Arden, November 2002. The warrant was issued at 8:15 a.m. and took immediate effect across New Hampshire and Vermont. At the same moment, the cold case unit received official notification, authorization granted. Proceed with coordinated arrest. Easton was in the command room when the green light appeared on the central screen. He stood, walked to the faded old wall map he had kept for 16 years, still bearing 3 red dots marking Lake Ossipee, Timberline Bar, and Bobby Tarr's house. They had once been disconnected points with no answer, but now formed a perfect straight line, closing the longest mystery of his career. Outside, night wind poured through the window, cold and quiet, as if announcing that the final moment had finally arrived. Early morning on October 11, 2018, while Vermont was still shrouded in the first winter fog, a joint federal task force consisting of the Vermont State Police and the New Hampshire Cold Case Unit began executing the arrest warrant for Robert Bobby Tarr at his residence in Springfield. The 2-story wooden house stood isolated at the end of a suburban dirt road, nearly 4 miles from the town center, surrounded by rows of leafless maple trees. At 6:25 a.m., confirmation that the target was inside the house came over the radio. 3 unmarked vehicles quietly closed in and surrounded the area. The 2 lead investigators, Marcus Hill and Thomas Vickers, approached the front door while the support teams circled to the rear. When the knock sounded along with the announcement, Vermont State Police, "We have an arrest warrant," there was only a faint noise from inside before Bobby appeared. Wearing a wool jacket, his eyes widening at the words "Cold Case Unit" on their badges. He did not resist, and simply asked, "For what happened back then?" Hill confirmed the warrant and clearly read the charge. In connection with the disappearance and suspected murder of Leslie Arden, occurring on November 27, 2002. Bobby was handcuffed and led to the vehicle while the forensics team immediately sealed the area and began seizing evidence according to the approved inventory in the accompanying search warrant. In the garage, the dark red Ford F-150, the same make and model as the tire tracks found at the Lake Ossipee scene, was parked neatly, its faded paint and distinctive aggressive tread tires still intact. The truck was sealed on site, photographed from all angles, and loaded onto a flatbed for transport to Concord for examination. When the tailgate was opened, technicians discovered a plastic tool bin containing, among other items, a tattered old paper map. When unfolded, Route 16 and the Conway area were circled in red ink, with a small X marked directly at Lake Ossipee. Under flashlight, the ink was blurred but still legible. This item was separately logged, sealed, and labeled R17, Regional Map. In the living room, police also seized a small notepad containing a list of phone numbers and scattered notes, including the line Timberline, 930. Everything was collected according to procedure and placed into evidence storage. When the search concluded, Bobby was placed in a transport vehicle under the watch of 3 officers. Local press began arriving after the news leaked over police radio, but the area remained completely sealed. Bobby stayed silent, eyes fixed on the ground as he was walked out, his face showing exhaustion but no panic. In the temporary command center in Concord, Michael Easton monitored the entire operation via live video feed, quietly observing every move. When the image of the F-150 being loaded onto the truck appeared, he gave a slight nod, knowing the final critical piece of evidence from the 16-year-old case was finally seeing daylight again. By 9:10 a.m., the convoy left Springfield for Concord. During transport, the custody report was completed and electronically transmitted to the state prosecutor's office. Evidence was sealed: the F-150, the Conway map, the notepad, and various samples collected from the garage. When the convoy reached Concord at noon, Bobby was transferred to the state detention facility to await formal extradition to New Hampshire. The criminalistics lab took custody of the truck for analysis of paint, tires, and fiber traces. Under the chassis, technicians discovered a patch of dried gray-brown clay, soil that matched the geological layers sampled from the Ossipee lakeshore in 2002. This finding was added to a supplemental report and forwarded to the forensic team. Once the preliminary report was finished, the cold case unit formally announced internally. Robert Tarr arrested without incident, primary suspect in NH-024,189 case. The news quickly spread throughout Concord, marking a major turning point in a case long considered hopeless. That afternoon, as Easton stepped out of the office, the season's first snow began to fall, blanketing the street in front of police headquarters. He stood watching the flakes swirl, remembering the night in 2002 when they had searched Route 16 in vain. Now the man they had just arrested was the same one, and Leslie Arden's story was finally returning to where it began. In the silent cold of New Hampshire, where justice had patiently waited for 16 long years. On October 12, 2018, just one day after his arrest in Springfield, Robert Bobby Tarr was transported to Concord for formal interrogation at New Hampshire State Police Headquarters. The interview room was prepared in complete privacy, attended by State Prosecutor Andrew Carter, 2 cold case unit investigators, and retired Lieutenant Michael Easton in an advisory role. Bobby entered wearing an orange jumpsuit, his face gaunt, eyes ringed with dark circles from lack of sleep. When advised of his right to remain silent and right to counsel, he simply nodded and said he did not want an attorney at this stage. For the first 2 hours, Bobby remained sullen and unresponsive to every question, even when shown photographs of the evidence. The Nikon F3 camera, the Conway map, the wool gloves, and the restored film images from Timberline Bar. Easton sat silently observing, taking notes only when Bobby's gaze shifted from item to item, his eyes flickering slightly when the mirror reflection photograph was placed in front of him. After more than 3 hours of silence, Prosecutor Carter switched to psychological pressure, describing in detail how Bobby's DNA had been identified in the gloves, and that discovering the Conway map, marked with an X at Lake Ossipee, could not be coincident. Still no reaction. Then Easton spoke softly. "You told me in 2003 you just wanted to be left alone and forget everything. But if that's really what you wanted, she's still out there, under cold earth for 16 years. The atmosphere in the room shifted. Bobby looked up, eyes cloudy, paused several seconds, sighed, and his cuffed hands clenched slightly. He asked quietly, "If I talk, does this end?" Easton replied, "It ends when the truth is told." Bobby lowered his head, voice trembling, and almost whispered, "I didn't mean to kill her. We just argued. At the eastern edge of Lake Ossipee. She fell. I panicked and didn't know what to do." The room went still. Carter signaled the technician to start recording. Bobby continued haltingly, explaining that after leaving Timberline Bar on the night of November 27, 2002, he followed Leslie's car along Route 16, trying to talk because I couldn't accept she was meeting someone else. When she refused, he chased her to the woods by the lake, where her car stopped. She got out, and I just wanted to talk. But then she called me sick, and I lost control. After a hard shove, Leslie tumbled down the slope and struck her head on a rock. Bobby said he couldn't hear her breathing, panicked, then dragged the body deeper into the woods and dug a grave with the folding shovel he kept in the truck. It was cold, snowing. I couldn't see anything, just wanted it over. Easton asked for the exact location. Bobby answered in a low voice. "East side of Lake Ossipee, the old birch grove, 15 paces off the trail. There's a big gray rock right there," he said. He remembered clearly because that night I hid behind the rock when I heard police cars pass. After burying her, Bobby threw the gloves into the snowbank, got back in his truck, and drove away. He admitted, returning a few days later to make sure the grave remained undisturbed, then burned the bloody clothes, threw the camera and some of Leslie's belongings into the Connecticut River, but forgot the Nikon was still in the truck. When Carter asked why he stayed silent for 16 years, Bobby answered curtly, "Because I was scared, and because no one would have believed me." When the transcript was complete, Easton glanced at the clock, over 6 continuous hours. No one in the room spoke further. Only the sound of light rain against the window. Bobby was returned to his cell, while the cold case team planned an urgent operation for the next morning, coordination with local forensics to the woods east of Lake Ossipee, the location Bobby had just revealed, to verify the burial site. Easton held the statement, staring at the suspect's scrawled handwriting, birch trees, east side of lake, and knew the final piece of the case he had pursued for nearly 2 decades had just emerged from the darkness. On the morning of October 13, 2018, less than 24 hours after Robert Bobby Tarr revealed the burial location, the New Hampshire State Forensic Team, together with Carroll County Police and the Cold Case Unit, commenced excavation in the birch woods on the eastern side of Lake Ossipee. The site was marked using GPS coordinates provided by Bobby in his statement, approximately 400 meters from the main trail on gently sloping terrain covered in decaying leaves. The weather was cold, thick fog, and moisture from the lake made the forest air heavy with early winter dampness. Retired Lieutenant Michael Easton was present from the start, standing just outside the cordon, silently watching the field team set up equipment. Technicians erected a protective tent, hung tarps against rain, and installed lighting to ensure visibility in low light. The suspect area was identified by a large gray rock, exactly as Bobby described, next to 3 birch trunks leaning against one another, the bark still bearing old axe marks, possibly from camouflage. Once the topsoil was cleared, the ground-penetrating radar, GPR, detected an anomalous void at approximately 80 centimeters depth. The forensic team began hand-digging with trowels and brushes to preserve soil layers. After more than an hour, a shovel struck something solid. As earth was brushed away, a silver nylon tarp appeared, rolled tightly like an old package, its edges still holding fragments of rotted paracord. The entire site fell silent. Lead technician Marcus Hill signaled the crime scene photographer to document every angle. The tarp was carefully cut. The smell of damp soil mixed with decay escaped. Inside lay a nearly intact skeleton, wrapped in a woman's wool coat and jeans, with a few small items scattered around, a silver bracelet, Honda car keys, and a single earring. Beneath the remains, the team recovered small plastic fragments, matching the color of a Civic rear bumper, collected as additional evidence. The remains were tagged NH0, 24189R, sealed per protocol, and transported to the Central Concord Forensic Laboratory. Simultaneously, investigators expanded the search radius 20 meters around the grave and recovered an old mud-covered camera lens cap and a dark wool fabric scrap. As the sun rose higher and snow began to melt, Easton stood gazing at the large rock, the only landmark Bobby had remembered for 16 years. He knew this spot was the end of the road Leslie had begun, but never finished on the night of November 27, 2002. By late afternoon, once all samples were transported back to Concord, the forensic team began identification procedures. Based on dental records, bone structure, and clothing, the preliminary report concluded highly consistent with the description of Leslie Arden. A femur sample was taken for nuclear DNA testing against the maternal reference sample stored in the cold case archive since 2003. Next-generation STR technology produced results within 48 hours. On October 15, 2018, at 10 a.m., the final report reached the state prosecutor's desk. DNA profile match, 99.998% identity to reference sample of Leslie M. Arden. When those words appeared on the screen, the cold case unit conference room fell silent. Easton signed the confirmation confirmed identification of remains. 16 years of searching, hundreds of interviews, countless dead ends, at last they had found her. In the evidence vault, Abby Vance reopened the boxes containing the green wool gloves, the Nikon F3 camera, the Conway map with its X, and now added the small aluminum case tag, ready for final archiving. At the Ossipee site, the excavation area was refilled with fresh soil and marked scene processed, state police evidence completed. That night, Easton returned to Concord, walking the long corridor of the forensic center, where yellow lights reflected off cold concrete. He paused in front of room 3, where Leslie Arden's remains were stored, and stood there a long while. The frosted glass door reflected his face and the years this disappearance had haunted him. When he signed the final Ossipee field report, he wrote only 4 short words: "Found, finally found." With those words, the journey that began on a snowy night in 2002 closed exactly where it had stopped, among the silent birch trees, where justice had finally found the shape of truth. On October 16, 2018, one day after DNA confirmation of the victim's identity, the New Hampshire State Forensic Laboratory began a comprehensive autopsy of the remains recovered from the eastern edge of Lake Ossipee. Under the direction of Dr. Harold Mendez, the state's leading forensic anthropologist specializing in skeletal trauma, the examination lasted nearly 40 continuous hours. The body was completely skeletonized, but relatively well preserved due to the cold, dry soil conditions. Initial findings noted a large fracture on the right rear of the cranium radiating outward, plus a 9 mm circular perforation passing from the left temple to the right, characteristic of a close-range gunshot wound. Microscopic examination revealed gunshot residue around the entrance wound edges, indicating the shot was fired from less than 1 meter. Inside the cranial cavity, technicians recovered a partially oxidized metal object. X-ray imaging confirmed it was an intact 9 mm copper-jacketed bullet bearing clear barrel rifling marks. The bullet was labeled NH-024189B1 and transferred to ballistics. The left humerus also showed an old fracture, possibly from a fall or defensive action. Remaining clothing fragments displayed a small perforation corresponding to the bullet path, proving the injury occurred while the victim was alive. Mendez's preliminary conclusion read, "Cause of death: severe cranial trauma due to gunshot wound penetrating left temple, direction left to right, front to back." Results were forwarded to the cold case unit the same afternoon. The Concord Ballistics Lab received the bullet and compared it to the state civilian firearm registry database. Within 2 days it matched the rifling characteristics of a Springfield Armory Hellcat 9 mm pistol, a firearm registered to Robert E. Tarr in 1999 and reported stolen in 2003, 3 months after Leslie's disappearance. Twist direction, groove depth, and land width were identical. The ballistics report concluded, bullet recovered from skull, consistent with barrel rifling of firearm, registered to Robert E. Tarr. Probability of match exceeds 99.9%. Concurrently, residue analysis around the cranial fracture confirmed nitrate and copper particles, components of unburned powder, further supporting a contact or near-contact shot. Gray polyester fibers found inside the coat matched samples from the seats of Bobby's Ford F-150. Easton read the full reports in the small cold case office, expression grave. Each forensic detail was the final puzzle piece confirming everything Bobby had hidden for 16 years. This was no accident, no unintentional fall, but an intentional act. On October 18th, the state prosecutor held an internal press conference attended by investigators, technicians, and forensic representative. On screen, Dr. Mendez displayed a 3D reconstruction of the bullet trajectory, illustrating a horizontal shot to the head, while the victim was slightly bent forward, proving the shooter stood face-to-face, no more than 1 meter away. The final report was signed and stamped. Cause of death: gunshot wound to left temple. Homicide. In the weapon linkage section, firearm registered to suspect. There was no longer any room for doubt. That night in Concord, snow fell heavier, covering the steps outside police headquarters. Easton left the office late, carrying the thick case file, walking slowly through the silent streets. After years filled with unanswered questions, only one thing remained in his heart. Justice now had form, and evidence had spoken for Leslie Arden. The young woman who vanished in the winter snow of 2002 had finally regained her voice. Through the bullet, through the bones, through the rifling marks that recounted the exact fatal moment the killer believed would remain buried forever with the snow. On October 19, 2018, after forensic examination officially determined Leslie Arden's cause of death as a gunshot wound to the temple, Robert Bobby Tarr was brought in for his final interrogation at the New Hampshire State Detention Facility. Present were Prosecutor Andrew Carter, 2 cold case unit investigators, a recording technician, and retired Lieutenant Michael Easton. Before starting, Bobby was re-advised of his rights. He agreed to speak voluntarily and requested the entire session be recorded. His voice was hoarse, eyes vacant, hands clasped on the metal table. His account began slowly and haltingly, but with chilling clarity. Bobby said that on the night of November 27, 2002, he knew Leslie was meeting someone at Timberline Bar, so he drove to Conway intending to talk one last time. He parked several blocks away, watched from his truck, and saw her leave with friends and say goodbye. I just wanted to talk. I thought if I saw her I could change her mind. When Leslie walked to the parking lot, he called her name. She paused briefly, then turned away. Bobby said she rejected him outright, told him it was over. She said I had to leave her alone, that I scared her. They argued right there, her voice growing louder, so he feared someone would hear and followed her car when she drove off toward Conway. Light snow was falling, roads slippery. Bobby kept his distance to avoid detection. She stopped in the woods near the lake. I stopped a few dozen yards back. I got out still planning to apologize. Leslie stepped out of her car, taillights glowing red on the snow. He approached. They argued again. She threw her gloves down and pushed him away. I lost it, pulled the gun out, meaning only to scare her. According to Bobby, the Springfield Hellcat 9mm was still in the truck from a recent hunting trip. I just wanted her to stop yelling. I raised the gun and it went off. I don't remember pulling the trigger. I just heard the shot and saw her fall. He said he couldn't believe he had actually fired, but when he saw blood in her hair, he panicked. I knelt, called her name, but there was no response. I knew I had ruined everything. He then dragged the body deeper into the woods to a concealed spot. I dug with my hands first, then the folding shovel from the truck. The ground was like rock from the cold. I remember shaking, not from cold, but from fear. He described wrapping the body in the silver tarp from his truck bed, tying it with paracord, and covering it hastily. I heard police cars on the road, so I hid behind the big rock. When they passed, I got back in my truck and drove home. When asked about evidence disposal, Bobby said the next morning, he threw the coat and the gun into the Connecticut River, burned the bloody clothes behind his house, and washed the truck repeatedly. He didn't remember what happened to both gloves, only that one was left near the lake. When asked why he kept Leslie's camera, he answered, "It was in her purse. I took it without knowing why, then just stored it in the garage." Throughout the interview, Bobby's voice never rose. At times it caught, but he showed no clear remorse. When Easton asked why he never turned himself in, he replied only, "I thought no one would believe me. Everyone already saw me as the bad guy." Easton made a note, looked at him for a long moment, then said, "She didn't deserve to lie out there for 16 years. Bobby offered no reply, only stared at the table. After nearly 5 continuous hours, the full statement was transcribed into a 27-page document, read back line by line to the suspect. Bobby confirmed its accuracy, signed, and fingerprinted the final page. Audio and video were archived under statement #T11/2018. When he finished signing, he leaned back and sighed, "It's finally over." Easton said nothing, simply gathered the files, glancing through the frosted window, where early snow was falling across the prison yard. For him, this was not merely a killer's confession, but the closing chapter of a puzzle that had haunted an entire generation of investigators. The disappearance that began on a snowy night in 2002 was now sealed by the cold recounting of the man who had buried it. On November 26, 2018, exactly 16 years to the day since Leslie Arden vanished, the trial of Robert Bobby Tarr officially opened at the New Hampshire Superior Court in Concord. Inside the large courtroom, tension hung heavy in the air. The public gallery was packed with reporters, Conway residents, and many who had been part of the original 2002 investigation. State Prosecutor Andrew Carter represented the prosecution, while defense counsel was handled by attorney Michael Harlan. Bobby was brought into court wearing a gray prison jumpsuit, his face calm, but his eyes betraying exhaustion. Before proceedings began, Carter addressed the jury with a 2-count indictment, second-degree murder, and concealment of a body, asserting that Bobby's actions were not random, but the result of prolonged obsession, control, and jealousy. He opened with the line, "We are going to let Leslie Arden speak through the evidence she left behind in silence." Over the 9 days of trial, the entire chain of evidence was presented one by one to the 12-member jury. First came the Conway map found in Bobby's garage, with Lake Ossipee circled in red pen. Then the Nikon F3 camera bearing matching fingerprints, followed by the STR/YSTR DNA results that confirmed the biological material inside the wool gloves belonged to the defendant. The centerpiece was the ballistics report. The bullet recovered from the victim's skull was a perfect match to the Springfield Hellcat 9mm pistol. Bobby had registered in 1999, when Dr. Harold Mendez presented the forensic findings and described the bullet's path from left temple to right. Many in the courtroom held their breath. It exactly matched Bobby's confession during interrogation. The audio recording of that interrogation was played in open court. Bobby's voice came through steady, cold, and hollow as he recounted stalking Leslie, the argument, and pulling the trigger in a moment of panic. Several spectators turned away when he described wrapping the body in a silver tarp and burying it beneath the birch trees. The defense attempted to argue that the confession was given while Bobby was psychologically broken and without counsel present, but Prosecutor Carter immediately countered with the physical evidence. The actual tarp was recovered at the scene, wrapped around the remains, and every detail of the burial site Bobby described matched the location perfectly. The jury was also shown video of the excavation in which the skeletal remains were found exactly where the defendant said they would be. Crime scene photographs were displayed slowly, frame after frame of snow-covered ground, white birch trees, and freshly turned earth, until the courtroom fell so silent the only sound was the court clerk's pen scratching across paper. The defense continued to claim the shot could have been accidental, while Bobby only intended to scare her. But Carter produced evidence of gunshot residue around the wound and a firing distance of less than 1 meter, proving intent. He concluded, "There is no accident when the man holding the gun walks out into a snowy night to hunt down a woman who had begged to be left alone." On the 6th day, Michael Easton was called to the witness stand. He recounted the 16-year pursuit of the case, from the fruitless searches to the moment they finally unearthed Leslie. His voice was hoarse and slow, yet every sentence was resolute. "We never gave up because the truth cannot be buried, only covered by snow." Easton's testimony left the courtroom silent for a long time. By the 8th day, the jury reviewed all physical evidence again, replayed the recorded confession, and re-examined the ballistics and DNA data. On the morning of the 9th day, the prosecutor delivered his closing argument, stressing that this was not merely a story of jealousy, but a lesson in obsession and violence hidden beneath an ordinary facade. The defense offered no further rebuttal, only asking the court to consider mental health factors. Before the jury retired to deliberate, Carter placed on the lectern a 2002 photograph of Leslie Arden, smiling in the snow, and said, "For 16 years, she has been right here waiting for this day." After slightly more than 3 hours of deliberation, the New Hampshire Superior Court jury returned to a courtroom thick with tension. All eyes turned to the foreperson, a middle-aged woman, as she stood holding the sealed verdict. Presiding Judge Eleanor Strauss asked the formal question, "Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor, we have." The courtroom fell deathly quiet as the clerk took the paper, broke the seal, and read aloud, "We, the jury, in the matter of the state of New Hampshire v. Robert Edward Tarr, unanimously find the defendant guilty of first-degree murder." A long silence followed, broken only by the dry scratch of pens. Bobby showed no reaction. He sat motionless, staring down at the table, hands clenched tightly. Judge Strauss continued. Sentence is pronounced pursuant to New Hampshire Revised Statutes, Section 631. A life imprisonment without possibility of parole. Prosecutor Carter gave a slight nod. Behind him, retired Lieutenant Michael Easton simply closed his eyes for a few seconds, as if finally closing a 16-year chapter. Defense attorney Michael Harlan rose to ask the court to note his client's cooperation, but the judge affirmed that the sentence was appropriate given the premeditated nature of the crime and the irrefutable evidence. When Strauss declared, "The sentence is effective immediately," 2 judicial officers approached and cuffed Bobby, according to procedure. He turned once toward the nearly empty gallery. Only a few reporters and 2 cold case unit investigators remained, his gaze blank, showing neither remorse nor resistance. After the trial, Prosecutor Carter gave a brief statement. Justice is not measured by time, but by the steadfastness of those who never forget. He thanked the investigative team and emphasized that this was the state's first cold case fully resolved through next-generation DNA technology. In the 23-page sentencing document, the court recorded, the defendant acted with premeditation, used a legally owned firearm to commit the crime, intentionally concealed evidence, and delayed justice for 16 years. The sentence of life without parole is to be served at the New Hampshire State Prison for Men in Concord. As final formalities concluded, Judge Strauss asked everyone to rise. Chairs scraped in unison, then silence fell as officers escorted Bobby from the courtroom. Outside, snow fell heavily, reflecting the pale yellow lights of the courthouse. On the stone steps, Easton watched the prison transport van disappear behind the iron gates, feeling both relief and emptiness. He had waited nearly 2 decades for this day. Yet when it arrived, it felt as cold as the first night he stepped into the 2002 missing person case. At the post-trial press conference, when a reporter asked Carter what message he had for the victim's family, he replied, "We cannot erase 16 years of waiting, but today Leslie Arden was finally called by her true name. A murder victim, no longer just a missing person." The final image of that day was the photograph of Leslie placed before the bench, her radiant smile against a backdrop of white snow, beneath the words "Justice Served." December 2018. In the Cold Case Unit archives, the final entry for case NH0-24189 was entered into the system. Closed. Conviction obtained. The evidence room lights were turned off at 9:10 p.m. Only the dim glow from the hallway filtered through the glass door, where countless other case files still waited silently for their turn. For Easton, that evening did not merely close a case, it closed an era of his life spent carrying the weight of an unfulfilled promise. The promise to find Leslie Arden, no matter how many more New Hampshire winters it took. In January 2019, after Robert "Bobby" Tarr's conviction became final and the file was transferred to archives, the New Hampshire Cold Case Unit conducted a comprehensive operational review of the 16-year investigation into the Leslie Arden case, file number NH0-24189. The meeting took place in the main conference hall in Concord and was attended by Prosecutor Andrew Carter, retired Lieutenant Michael Easton, DNA technician Abby Vance, and representatives from the FBI and the Vermont State Police Forensic Laboratory. The 114-page final report was divided into 3 main sections: evidence preservation, exploitation of next-generation STR/YSTR DNA technology, and interagency coordination in reconstructing the perpetrator's movements. The first section stressed the critical importance of maintaining evidence integrity, even when a case had been inactive for over 15 years. In 2003, every item from the wool gloves and plastic fragments to the Honda Civic and biological samples was properly sealed and stored in cold, dry conditions at the Central Concord warehouse. Strict adherence to preservation protocols ensured that fibers and skin cells remained viable for retesting with new technology. The report stated that a single error in sealing or storage could have caused complete DNA degradation, leaving the case forever unsolved. The second section analyzed the pivotal role of STR/YSTR technology in biological identification. From the mixed DNA sample that could not be separated in 2002, technician Abby Vance used next-generation profiling to isolate the Y chromosome component, tracing it to Robert Tarr via his 1997 criminal record. This breakthrough reopened the entire investigation and ultimately led to searches, evidence seizures, and the final confession. The evaluation noted, advancement in DNA profiling directly altered investigative outcome, technological evolution as determinant factor. The third section documented the effectiveness of multi-level, multi-agency cooperation among the Cold Case Unit, Vermont State Police, the FBI, and the Concord Forensics Lab. Each agency handled a specific link. Vermont executed the arrest, Concord performed ballistics analysis, and the FBI assisted with phone records and restoration of 2002 ATAN dead billing data. The report emphasized that this cross-disciplinary, cross-time model has become the template for handling cold cases statewide. An additional section detailed the methodology used to reconstruct the suspect's travel route by cross-referencing geographic maps, weather data, and phone logs, accurately recreating the 42-minute drive from Wolfboro to Conway on the night of November 27, 2002. By combining location analysis technology with behavioral data, investigators narrowed the time of the crime to a 40-minute window, sufficient to reconstruct the entire incident. The report also recommended standardizing case preservation procedures statewide, requiring law enforcement agencies to retain evidence from all unsolved cases for at least 20 years and to update records periodically for future re-examination as technology advances. In the conclusion, Prosecutor Carter stated, "The success of the Leslie Arden case is not only a victory of evidence, but a victory of patience, the patience of those who kept faith for 16 years. Michael Easton, who had opened the original 2002 missing person file, was invited to give the final remarks. He said simply, "If you want to solve old cases, keep everything exactly as it was, every scrap of cloth, every speck of dirt, every photograph, because they will speak when people have fallen silent." Those words were recorded verbatim in the official report and adopted as the Cold Case Unit's guiding principle for all future files. On January 22, 2019, the final report was stamped, filed, complete resolution, and archived at the Concord Judicial Repository. The thick file became training material for new investigators, proof that truth buried under 16 years of snow can still be unearthed through intellect, technology, and the unwavering determination of those who refuse to accept the words, "give up." On November 27, 2018, exactly 16 years since the snowy night Leslie Arden disappeared, a small ceremony was held at the Concord Funeral Home, attended by the victim's family, Cold Case Unit representatives, and investigators who had worked the case. On the table stood a silver urn flanked by 2 white candles. Beside it was the 2002 photograph of Leslie smiling brilliantly amid falling snow. Her mother, Mary Ann Arden, held the certificate transferring the remains from the state medical examiner's office. Her hand trembled slightly as she signed. Few words were spoken, only the sound of a pen gliding across paper and the cold wind rattling the windows. Michael Easton stood at the back, hat in hand, eyes fixed silently on the urn. He had lived with this case from the beginning, from the first missing person report in 2002, through the futile searches around Lake Ossipee, to 16 years later, when every piece of evidence finally brought Leslie home. When the ceremony ended, Abby Vance returned to the family a small box containing personal effects recovered with the remains, a silver bracelet, Honda car keys, and the Nikon camera lens cap. Mary Ann nodded gently and said she would bury them with her daughter's ashes on the hillside near their home, where Leslie used to practice yoga every morning. That same afternoon, the Cold Case Unit updated its database. Case NH0241189 was marked solved. Victim recovered. The file was closed with a red cover and a final bold note. Case closed. Full resolution achieved after 16 years. Andrew Carter signed it, then handed it to Easton to write the last entry. In the comment box, he wrote just 7 words: "She came home. Justice followed her." When the file was returned to the storage shelf, late-day sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating hundreds of other case folders still waiting to be reopened. Easton stepped outside. The first snow of winter had begun to fall, light flakes landing on his coat and melting instantly, like the quiet closing of a circle in time. He looked north toward the misty Ossipee forest, where justice had taken 16 years to find one woman. For him, the Leslie Arden case was not merely a solved file, but living proof that truth, no matter how deeply buried in ice, snow, or the passage of time, will one day return, like Leslie herself, like the faint but enduring light of a New Hampshire winter, finally touched by justice. The story of the Leslie Arden case, a woman who vanished on a snowy night in 2002 and was found 16 years later, is not just a closed criminal file, it is a mirror reflecting modern American society. A place where justice may arrive late, but it never disappears. In today's world, where news is filled with violence hidden behind seemingly ordinary relationships, Leslie's case is a powerful reminder of the importance of recognizing signs of control, jealousy, and emotional abuse in personal relationships. Bobby Tarr was not the stereotype of a dangerous stranger. He was a former partner, someone once trusted, showing that violence most often arises within the closest relationships. Leslie's attempts to end the relationship without timely protection reflect the reality that many victims of emotional abuse remain silent out of fear or the belief they can handle it alone. The lesson for American society today is clear. Listen, believe, and offer support the moment someone says they do not feel safe. For law enforcement, the journey of the Cold Case Unit proves that long-term investment in forensic science and evidence preservation is essential. Without preserved evidence, modern STR-DNA technology, and federal cooperation, the Leslie Arden case might have remained forever in darkness. In real life, this reminds us that perseverance, from those who uphold justice to the community at large, is the foundation that keeps American society from losing faith in truth. The Leslie Arden story does not end in tragedy. It ends in affirmation. Justice may be slow, but it will come, if we never stop believing in it. Thank you for following the story of the Leslie Arden case, proof that justice can be delayed, but it can never be denied. Please subscribe to the channel so we can continue exploring other cold cases together, where the truth is still waiting to be found.